Neglected by her parents, she rescued a man, not knowing he was the most heartless Duke. The rain came like punishment from an indifferent heaven, each drop striking the forest road with the force of a judge's gavel. The autumn night was absolute in its darkness. No moon to guide, no stars to promise redemption, only the skeletal trees of Thornwood Forest reaching upward in silent accusation. The mud beneath Harriet Steele's feet was deep and relentless, all pulling at her worn shoes with each step, as if the earth itself wanted to keep her here, wanted to drag her back to the place she had just fled. But Harriet would not stop, could not stop. Behind her, already fading into the storm-consumed darkness, stood Walton House, not the grand estate of the Duke, but her adoptive family's humble country manor. The iron gates, wrought with intricate designs that mocked permanence and belonging, had closed behind her with a finality that echoed in her bones like the knell of a funeral bell. The sound of that gate closing was the sound of every hope she'd ever dared to nurture slamming shut. "You've already cost us far too much, Harriet. 17 years of provision, and you repay us with ingratitude. Go, find your own way in the world, and do not dare to darken our doorway again." Her mother's voice was still sharp in her memory, sharper than the rain that fell against her face, more cutting than the wind that tore at her inadequate shawl. Lady Catherine Steele had spoken these words with the casual cruelty of someone discussing the disposal of rubbish. No emotion, no hesitation, no maternal instinct whatsoever. Her father had not even spoken. He had simply observed from the shadows of the manor's interior, watching through the window as his wife ejected the daughter he had adopted 17 years ago, the daughter who had never fit into the family, who had always been the burden, the outsider, the constant reminder of a charity that had long since exhausted his patience. Lord Henry Steele had worn an expression of such indifference that Harriet almost wished he had been cruel instead. At least cruelty required feeling something. His silence was worse. It was the silence of a man for whom she had never truly existed. Harriet carried everything she owned in the world wrapped in a bundle of worn cloth that had once been a bedsheet. 3 dresses, all of them patched and repatched until more thread was visible than original fabric. A shawl, its fringe unraveling at the edges, full of holes that did nothing to block the winter cold. A hairbrush with missing bristles that she had salvaged from the servants' quarter years ago. And most precious of all, a small cloth bag containing her only true inheritance, the herbs, dried verbena, carefully gathered beneath full moons when the healer women said they were most potent. The dried thyme, rosemary, chamomile, burdock root, valerian that she had harvested and prepared with meticulous care, and a leather-bound notebook, its pages yellowed with age, filled with recipes in her own hand, her handwriting growing more confident with each passing year, poultices for wounds, teas for inflammation, tinctures for sleeplessness, salves for burns. This knowledge, painstakingly recorded over years, was the only thing in her life that felt real, the only thing that was truly hers. The knowledge had come from Marta. Marta was dead now, had been dead for 3 winters. The old healer had been the only person in Harriet's life who had ever shown her genuine kindness, not the thin, grudging charity of her adoptive parents, but real kindness. The kind that asked nothing in return except that Harriet learn, remember, and pass the knowledge forward. "The gift is in your hands now, child," Marta had said near the end, her papery hand gripping Harriet's with surprising strength. Not in the herbs themselves, but in knowing how to listen to a body, how to hear what it needs before the person even knows themselves. That gift cannot be taken from you. No one can take it. Remember that when the world tries to convince you that you are worthless. Harriet had tried to hold on to those words, tried to believe them during the long, cold years at Walton House. but it was difficult to believe you possessed any gift when those around you treated you as a burden. To the world's eye, Harriet Steele was invisible in her insignificance. Her clothes hung on her frame like fabric on a scarecrow, worn, patched, barely functional. The shoes on her feet were 2 sizes too large, cast-offs from a servant who had moved to the city, and let water in at every step, so her feet were perpetually numb and blistered. Her hands were marked by years of labor that a 17-year-old should never have been forced to endure, rough, calloused, with permanently stained fingernails that no amount of scrubbing could clean. The physical marks of servitude were written across her body like a biography of suffering. And then there was her leg. The limp was the most visible marker of her unworthiness, or so her parents had made clear. When Harriet was 7 years old, a fever had swept through the servants' quarters. The servants received the local physician's care immediately. Harriet had been locked in her room without a doctor, without proper medicine, without anything but water and bread. The fever had been severe enough to scar the muscle in her left leg, leaving her with a permanent limp that caused pain on cold nights and when she was tired. She had learned to walk in such a way that the limp was barely noticeable if you weren't looking closely. Years of practice, of tilting her weight just so, of moving with deliberate grace to camouflage the damage, but the pain never disappeared. On winter nights like this one, when the cold penetrated deep into her bones, the old injury throbbed like a second heartbeat, a constant physical reminder that she had never been loved enough to be cared for. But beneath the ragged clothes, beneath the marks of poverty and suffering, beneath the limp and the scars and the physical evidence of a life spent unwanted, there was something else. There was power. Not the kind of power that came from titles or wealth or social position. Not the kind of power that commanded armies or moved markets, but a quiet power. An ancestral power that had been passed down through generations of healer women. The kind of power that could pull a drowning person back to consciousness, that could ease suffering, that could transform pain into healing. It was a power that manifested in infinite patience, in the way she could sit with someone in their darkest moment and simply be present, asking nothing, demanding nothing, offering only her steady, unwavering attention. It showed in the precision with which she measured drops of tincture, the delicacy with which she gathered herbs under moonlight, the way her hands seemed to know instinctively where to touch, where to soothe, where to encourage healing. It was the ability to listen to a body, to hear not just the words a person spoke, but the language of their pain, to understand afflictions before they were even named, to know when someone needed rest and when they needed movement, when they needed warmth and when they needed the cleansing of cold. This was Harriet's true gift. This was what Marta had seen in her. Not a burden, but a healer. The Steeles had never understood it, had never valued it, had instead treated her as a servant, demanding that she perform the menial labor that kept the household functioning while offering her nothing in return but a place to sleep and enough food to keep her alive. And now they had cast her out entirely. On that night of abandonment, Harriet walked aimlessly along the main road that connected Walton House to the neighboring lands. She had no destination. She had formed no plan beyond the knowledge that she needed distance between herself and the rejection, distance between herself and the house where every moment had been suffused with the knowledge that she was unwanted. She was moving through the forest almost in a trance, her feet following the muddy path almost of their own accord, when something made her stop. It was the horse first that caught her attention, a magnificent black thoroughbred, standing agitated in the middle of the road. The animal was breathing heavily, its coat streaked with sweat and mud, its saddle still attached but the reins trailing loose in the dirt. It was clearly distressed, clearly injured, and then Harriet saw why. A few meters beyond the horse, barely visible in the darkness, there was a shape on the ground. A man. His body lay motionless in the mud, one leg bent at an unnatural angle, his arm outstretched as if he had tried to catch himself during the fall and failed. Harriet's first instinct was to keep walking. What good could she possibly do? She had nothing. No resources, no authority, no way to help anyone. She had just been cast out onto the road with nothing but the clothes on her back and a bag of herbs. This man, whoever he was, would need a doctor. A healer who actually mattered. Not a 17-year-old servant girl who had just been declared worthless by her own family. But even as the practical voice in her head suggested she move on, her feet were already moving toward him. This was her gift. Not the words people spoke, not the social niceties of a proper woman. Her gift was the instinct to help, the compulsion to ease suffering, the drive to save others even when it would be safer, more logical, to save herself. She knelt in the mud beside him, ignoring the cold seeping through her clothes, ignoring the pain in her scarred leg from kneeling at such an awkward angle. She reached out with trembling fingers and touched the man's neck, feeling for a pulse. It was there. Faint, irregular, but present. And with that small, fragile beat beneath her fingers, Harriet made a choice. She had been abandoned, cast out, deemed worthless by those who should have loved her. But she would not abandon this stranger. She would not cast him aside. She would not judge him worthless, even if it meant risking the last hours of her life in a forest during a storm with a man she didn't know. Even if it meant staying in the cold when she had nowhere warm to go. Even if it meant using the last of her resources, her herbs, her knowledge, her presence, to save someone who might never even know her name. Harriet pulled her inadequate shawl tighter around both their bodies and began to work. What Harriet didn't know was that the man she just pulled from the mud was the most dangerous person in the entire kingdom. His reputation was whispered in drawing rooms and marketplaces across the land. They called him the Heartless Duke, a man so cruel, so utterly devoid of compassion, that even his own servants trembled in his presence. In a few hours, when the guards found them, Harriet's entire world would transform in ways she never could have imagined. Let's see what happens when they arrive. The guards who found them on the forest road treated her with a roughness that bordered on violence. Before she could even explain what had happened, before she could draw a breath to tell them that she had saved their master's life, they were pulling her away from Gabriel's unconscious form, their hands bruising her arms through the thin fabric of her dress. "Who are you?" the captain demanded, his scarred face inches from hers, his breath hot and accusatory. "What were you doing with the Duke? Did you cause the fall? Are you a thief? A witch?" The questions came rapid fire, each one heavy with suspicion. Harriet tried to answer, tried to explain about the storm, about finding him bleeding in the mud, about spending the night keeping him alive. But the guards seemed unwilling to listen. They looked at her worn clothes, her mud-caked skin, her inadequate shawl, and saw only a vagrant, a threat. She was placed roughly in a carriage, separated from Gabriel, transported through winding roads she didn't recognize until they arrived at a structure that made her breath catch in her throat. Nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared her for this. The manor rose before her like a monument to power itself. Towering stone walls, soaring windows that caught the weak morning light, gardens that stretched beyond her ability to comprehend. The entrance alone was larger than Walton House's entire east wing. Harriet stepped from the carriage on trembling legs, her scarred left leg screaming in protest, and felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She realized then that the man she had saved was not simply important. He was titled, powerful, everything she was not. A woman emerged from the darkness of the manor's interior, tall, severe, with silver hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face. Madam Whitmore. She introduced herself, the head housekeeper. She looked Harriet up and down with an expression that contained equal parts suspicion and something that might have been pity. "You will be the Duke's personal healer," the woman said without preamble. "A private chamber has been prepared. You will attend to his grace's recovery. You will not speak to other servants unless necessary. You will not leave the East Wing without permission. You will not—" She paused, her eyes narrowing. "Attempt anything foolish." The chamber was small but finer than anything Harriet had ever occupied. A real bed with clean linens, a table with supplies, bandages, herbs she didn't recognize, implements for healing. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. But it was Gabriel's chambers that truly undid her. She found him fevered and half-conscious, his breathing shallow, his skin burning. The journey had agitated the pneumonia developing in his lungs. Without hesitation, without allowing herself to think about where she was or what this place represented, Harriet moved into the role she had been born for. She tended his wounds with gentle hands, applied poultices from her own carefully hoarded supplies, sat vigil through another endless night, singing the old healing songs Marta had taught her, willing him back from the edge of darkness. It wasn't until near dawn, when Madame Whitmore entered with fresh linens, that Harriet learned the truth. "The man you saved is Gabriel Morley Walton," the housekeeper said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that made Harriet's blood run cold. "Duke of Walton, your life has changed forever, girl. People fear him. You would do well to remember that." Harriet looked at the fevered man before her, vulnerable, dying, nothing like the monster that legend suggested, and she understood with sudden, terrible clarity that she had saved something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. If you know someone who feels invisible right now, someone who's been told they don't matter, that they're a burden, I want you to share this story with them. Not for me, for them. Because sometimes we all need to be reminded that our kindness matters, that our presence in someone's life can change everything. Share this story with someone today. You might change their life. The voice came to him first, threading through the fog of fever like a lifeline cast into darkness. It was singing, ancient words in a language he didn't recognize, but something in the melody reached past all his defenses, past all the walls he had spent years constructing. Gabriel drifted between consciousness and oblivion, and each time he began to slip away, that voice pulled him back, a hand on his forehead, cool, steady, real. He tried to remember what had happened, the horse, the fall, the mud, and then nothing but pain and cold and the absolute certainty that death was coming for him. He had welcomed it in a way. Death was cleaner than living, but she had not let him die. When Gabriel finally opened his eyes fully, she was there, a girl with dark hair and exhausted eyes, moving through his chambers with a grace that seemed incongruous with her obvious poverty. He watched her hands as she worked, gentle, precise, certain. She prepared herbs and poultices with the focus of someone performing a sacred ritual. She tended to his wounds without flinching. Without the revulsion he'd grown accustomed to seeing in people's eyes. She simply cared. This was unfamiliar territory, dangerous territory. Gabriel was accustomed to fear. It was the foundation of his power. Servants trembled when he entered a room. Nobles competed for his favor through a mixture of greed and terror. Even his business associates respected him only because they knew what he was capable of, what he was willing to do to those who crossed him. That was how you maintained control, fear, cruelty, the absolute certainty that you would destroy anyone who tried to hurt you. He had learned this lesson years ago, in a moment of unbearable betrayal. His fiancée, a woman named Margaret, daughter of the Earl of Hartfield, had been everything society demanded he want. Beautiful, accomplished, connected to the right families. Gabriel had believed himself in love, had been planning their wedding when his business partner mentioned a rumor. Margaret had been unfaithful, multiple times. When Gabriel confronted her, she had laughed. The sound still echoed in his nightmares, a bright, brittle laugh that cut deeper than any blade. "How naive you are," she had said, her eyes cold with contempt. "Did you truly believe I could love someone like you? You're useful, Gabriel. Powerful, certainly, but fundamentally unlovable, emotionally hollow, and no woman of quality would ever choose you for anything but your title and wealth." The words had been precise, surgical, designed to wound in the places he was most vulnerable. That was when Gabriel had understood love was a weapon, kindness was a vulnerability. The only way to survive in a world that would use your heart against you was to stop having one. The Heartless Duke had been born that day. The reputation had grown over the years, cultivated deliberately. Some stories were true. He had ruined a lord who had made a poor business decision. He had dismissed a family from his lands for disloyalty. But most of the stories were exaggerated, twisted, made worse by fear and hearsay. And Gabriel had done nothing to correct them. Fear was useful. Fear kept people at a distance. Fear meant he would never again be vulnerable enough to be destroyed. Until she arrived. On the third day of his recovery, a servant dropped a tray near the door. The sound was minor, barely worth acknowledging. Gabriel responded with cold precision, his words cutting the boy down with surgical cruelty, watching the blood drain from the servant's face, feeling the familiar emptiness settle in his chest as he watched the boy flee in tears. And then Harriet had appeared, moving past the boy's sobbing form without comment, checking Gabriel's bandages with the same steady competence she always displayed. She didn't acknowledge the cruelty, didn't judge him, didn't even seem afraid. She simply existed in her kindness, as if his darkness was irrelevant. That was when Gabriel understood. She was dangerous. Not to his power or his position, but to the careful walls he had built around the broken parts of himself, the parts he had convinced himself were dead. She made him want to feel again, and that terrified him more than anything ever had. The manor's servants began seeking her out on the 8th day. A cook with chronic pain in her hands came first, hesitant and apologetic, asking if Harriet might spare a moment. Then a maid with insomnia that had plagued her for months. Then a guard with a wound that had festered despite the physician's care. Harriet tended to them all, drawing on her herb stores, applying what Marta had taught her about listening to a body's true needs. And they healed. Word spread through Walton Manor like wildfire. Suddenly, servants were finding reasons to pass through the East Wing. Harriet found herself in the strange position of being valued, not as a servant, but as something approaching essential. It was disorienting. It was wonderful. It was terrifying. Gabriel watched all of this with an intensity that made her skin prickle. During his recovery, he had begun asking her questions. Not demands, but genuine curiosities. Where had she learned her craft? Who had taught her? What was her philosophy of healing? At first, Harriet had answered cautiously, uncertain whether his interest was genuine or performative. But something in the way he listened, the way he actually listened as if her words mattered, gradually wore through her defenses. She found herself telling him about Marta, about the knowledge passed down through generations of healer women, about how healing was never just about the body, but about the spirit, about presence, about the fundamental belief that someone was worth saving. Gabriel had listened without interruption, and when she finished, he had simply said, "You're extraordinary." No one had ever called her that before. There were moments when he made her laugh, genuine, surprising laughter that seemed to burst from somewhere deep inside her that she'd thought was permanently closed. He was witty and curious and kind in ways that made the whispered rumors about the Heartless Duke seem like fairy tales told by people who had never actually met him. Then she met Haynes. The boy appeared in Gabriel's chambers one afternoon, small and cautious, with his father's dark eyes and a sadness that was far too mature for his 8 years. Harriet knelt to meet him at eye level, and something in his guarded expression softened. She began teaching him about the herbs, which ones helped with fever, which ones brought sleep, which ones had been used by healers for centuries. He listened with the same intensity his father displayed, asking questions that showed real intelligence, and through Haynes, Harriet understood something fundamental. Gabriel loved this boy. The way he looked at him, the patience he displayed, the careful attention to his needs. This was not the behavior of a heartless man. A heartless man did not adopt orphaned children. A heartless man did not raise them with such obvious devotion. But doubt crept in like poison. The jealous whispers began in earnest. A lady-in-waiting, someone with an edge to her voice and possession in her eyes, had begun spreading rumors that Harriet had enchanted the Duke, that she was a fortune hunter, that she was manipulating him, that she was dangerous. One afternoon, Harriet overheard servants discussing her as if she wasn't there. "The Duke is under her spell, clearly," one said. "Mark my words, she'll have his entire fortune before the year is out, or worse." "Have you heard the rumors?" another whispered. "That she's a witch? That she's using dark magic to control him?" The words cut deeper than any physical blade. Everything she had dared to hope for suddenly felt fragile, built on sand rather than stone. Harriet allowed herself a dangerous question. What if they were right? What if her presence was corrupting Gabriel, pulling him back from the man he was trying to become? What if his kindness to her was just another form of the cruelty he was famous for? She had allowed herself to hope, to believe that maybe, impossibly, she belonged here. But hope was dangerous. Hope led to abandonment. Hope led to pain. She had learned that lesson before. Gabriel has built walls so high that no one has ever scaled them. He swore he'd never love again, never be vulnerable again, not after what Margaret did to him. But Harriet is changing that. Her kindness, her belief in his capacity for goodness. It's breaking through his defenses in ways he never expected. The question is, will she destroy him the way Margaret did? Or will she be the salvation he doesn't know he desperately needs? The answer will determine the rest of his life. Gabriel was breaking every rule he had ever set for himself. He found excuses to be in Harriet's presence, reasons to visit the East Wing, to walk the manor grounds where she gathered herbs, to sit in the library where she sometimes read in the late afternoons. He allowed her to see him as he truly was, not the calculating Duke, but a man who read poetry, who played chess with his son, who sometimes stood at the windows looking at nothing in particular, wrestling with demons she could not see. "I am not the man the world believes me to be," he confessed to her one evening, the words emerging unbidden. "But neither am I the man I want to be. I don't know how to be anything other than what I have become." She had looked at him with such sadness that it nearly broke him. Then came the attack. Lord Ashford's cousin cornered Harriet in the garden on a gray afternoon. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with a kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You should know what you're entangling yourself with," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "The Duke has a pattern with women. He becomes obsessed, elevates them, then destroys them when they bore him. There was a woman before, Margaret. She left Walton completely shattered, never fully recovered. He's incapable of genuine feeling. He uses people as weapons against his own emptiness." The words poisoned everything. Harriet felt them seep into her like venom, settling into the cracks of her already fragile self-esteem. That evening she confronted Gabriel in his study. The room was lined with books, lit by firelight, and he stood by the window looking out at the darkening grounds. "Is it true?" she demanded, hating the tremor in her voice. "Was there another woman? Did you hurt her?" His silence was answer enough. Yes, he finally said, turning to face her, and she felt something break inside her. There was, and yes, I heard her. I was not the man I am trying to become. I was still wearing the armor, still using people as shields against my own pain. I told myself it was love, but it wasn't. It was possession. It was control. He stepped closer, and she wanted to run. But he continued. That woman saw me as I was then. Powerful, cruel, untouchable. She was fascinated by the danger. I mistook that for love. But you see me as I am trying to become. You see my potential for goodness, and that is the only thing that has ever felt real to me. His voice cracked. I cannot promise you that I will never hurt you. I can only promise you that I will spend the rest of my life trying not to, that I will choose you every single day in 1,000 small ways. Harriet wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But the doubt gnawed at her, and she couldn't hide it. She could see it register on his face, the knowledge that she didn't trust him, that he was losing her. Gabriel spent the next day making decisions that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. He contacted the nobleman he had wronged years before and offered genuine reparations. He settled a long-standing dispute fairly, apologized sincerely for the pain he had caused. The old Gabriel would have fought, crushed his opponent, proved his superiority through domination. This Gabriel chose differently. When he found Harriet packing her few belongings, his heart nearly stopped. You can leave if you must, he said quietly, and the pain in his voice was raw, genuine. If you cannot trust me, then staying would be worse than any pain I could inflict. But I am asking you to stay, not as a duke to a healer, not as a master to a servant, but as a man who loves you, asking you to believe in him one more time. She looked at him with tears streaming down her face, and he saw the moment she made her choice. She set down the bundle she was holding. I'm staying, she whispered. That evening, Gabriel gathered the court. His voice, when he spoke, carried the authority of absolute power, but it was power wielded in service of love. I am the Duke of Walton, and I have broken men for lesser insults than I have given to this woman. And now I stand before all of you and declare that Harriet Steele is the one person in this world who has made me want to be better. She will be my wife. She will be your duchess. And I will spend every day for the rest of my life proving to her that she made the right choice to believe in me. The room went silent. In that silence, the heartless Duke ceased to exist. In his place stood a man capable of transformation. Gabriel brought her back to the forest at dawn. The ancient trees that had seemed so terrifying that first night were beautiful in the pale morning light. Golden rays filtered through bare branches, illuminating the frost that clung to the grass. The mud had frozen solid. The air was cold and clear, carrying the promise of renewal rather than despair. He took her hand and led her to the exact spot where he had fallen, where she had saved him, where everything had changed. The walk was difficult for Harriet. Her scarred leg ached in the cold. But Gabriel never mentioned it, simply adjusted his pace to match hers, offering his arm without making her ask. When they reached the clearing, he knelt before her despite the frozen ground. He pulled a ring from his pocket, not ostentatious but elegant, simple silver with a single diamond that caught the rising sun. I am proposing to you because I cannot imagine a future that does not include you, he said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his chest. Not as my healer, not as a servant, but as my equal, my partner, my wife. He painted the vision for her, a life where her voice mattered in every decision, where her healing gift would continue to bless not just Walton Manor, but the surrounding villages, where she would raise Haynes as his mother, where she would never again be made to feel invisible or unworthy. I know I am not the man you deserved when we met, he continued, his eyes searching hers. But I am determined to become him. Every single day I will choose you. I will choose kindness. I will choose the man you've shown me I could be. She saw him clearly then, not the legend of the heartless Duke, and not a villain masquerading as reformed. She saw a deeply wounded man who had been broken and was choosing, every moment, to rebuild himself into something whole. Will you marry me, Harriet? Will you build this life with me? Her tears came before her words. Yes, she whispered. Yes, absolutely, yes. When he kissed her there, surrounded by the ancient trees that had witnessed their beginning, something in the world felt complete. If you believe in second chances, if you believe that love can transform even the hardest hearts, if you've ever felt abandoned and learned that you were worthy of love, then subscribe to this channel, because every story we tell here is about the power of believing in someone when they can't believe in themselves. New stories like this one drop every week, and each one will remind you why hope is never wasted. Subscribe now so you don't miss a single moment. 3 weeks later, Harriet stood before the mirror and didn't recognize herself. The wedding dress was exquisite, ivory silk with delicate lace that seemed to capture light itself. The veil, held in place by a crown of fresh flowers and herbs, a nod to her healing gift, fell in soft cascades down her back. But it wasn't the dress that transformed her. It was the woman looking back from the mirror, confident, cherished, loved, a woman who belonged. Madame Whitmore entered, took her hands, and her stern face softened with genuine emotion. You have changed this place, child. You have changed the Duke. I have served Walton Manor for 30 years, and I have never seen it as it is now, warm, alive, full of hope. Thank you for that. Harriet embraced her, tears threatening to ruin her carefully arranged face. The older housekeeper pulled back slightly, her eyes twinkling. And this, she said, producing a small velvet box, is something I wore at my own wedding. A talisman. It brings luck to those who step into marriage with true hearts. Inside was an antique brooch, delicate, beautiful, passed down through generations of women who had loved fiercely. Harriet pinned it near her heart, feeling the weight of their collective hope. Gabriel stood in black coat with silver embroidery, silk vest impeccable, but his mind was entirely on Harriet. How she had changed his life, how she had believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself, how he had never imagined love like this could exist for someone like him. Haynes appeared at his side, nervous in his small suit, carrying the rings on a velvet cushion. Am I doing this right? The boy asked, anxiety clear in his young voice. Gabriel knelt to meet his eyes. Harriet is not replacing anyone. She is expanding our family. She is choosing us, just as I chose you when you were alone and frightened. And today, we are choosing her. We are telling the world that she belongs with us, that she is ours, and we are hers. Haynes nodded, understanding settling over his small features. Besides, Gabriel added with a gentle smile, she has taught you how to make tea that stops nightmares. That makes her family. The rose garden was transformed into sacred space. String quartet music floated through the air, the ancient healing song Harriet had sung to Gabriel that first night, arranged for instruments. The melody seemed to weave their story into the very air. Harriet walked toward him, and Gabriel's breath caught. She was radiant in a way that transcended beauty. She was alive with hope, with joy, with the certainty of being loved. The manor's servants lined the garden, people she had healed, people whose lives she had touched. Many wore tears, some whispered prayers. All watched as the vagrant healer walked toward her destiny. When she reached him, Gabriel was trembling. Tears lined his eyes as he whispered words only she could hear. You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen, and I am the luckiest man alive that you chose to stay." The vows came from the deepest places in their hearts. "Harriet," Gabriel began, his voice thick with emotion, "you entered my life when I was dying, not physically but spiritually and emotionally. You taught me that kindness is not weakness, that love is not a trap, that vulnerability is something to cherish. You showed me I could be redeemed. I promise to honor you as my partner. I promise to spend the rest of my life proving you were right to believe in me. I promise to love you completely, unconditionally, and forever." Harriet's voice trembled as she spoke. "Gabriel, you showed me that belonging transcends blood or birthright. You offered me not just a home, but a family. You looked at me, truly looked at me, and saw a woman of value, a woman worthy of love. I promise to stand by you in all things, to be your partner in building a life of love and hope. I promise to love your son as my own, and to raise any children God gives us knowing they are worthy of love, simply because they exist. I promise to never let you doubt your capacity for goodness." When she mentioned other children, her hand moved instinctively to her belly. Gabriel's eyes widened as understanding bloomed across his face. She had told him only yesterday, wanted to share the secret at the moment that would mark their new beginning. The tears came harder then, tears of joy at the promise of new life born from love. When the priest declared them husband and wife, Gabriel kissed her with urgent passion, the kiss of a man who had found his salvation, his redemption, his home. The celebration erupted across the gardens, tables laden with food, music, laughter. Class barriers dissolved in genuine joy. Harriet danced with everyone, servants, nobles, Haines, radiating happiness with such intensity that even the skeptics found themselves smiling. Gabriel watched her with such love and pride that the entire assembly could see it. The heartless Duke had a heart, and it belonged entirely to her. But this is just the beginning. Harriet and Gabriel's story continues, and we're about to explore what happens after happily ever after. Because in Walton Manor, not everyone is happy about this transformation. There are enemies who want revenge. There are secrets that haven't been revealed. And there's a woman from Gabriel's past who's about to reappear with a confession that could destroy everything. In our next story, you'll discover what really happened between Gabriel and Margaret, and why her return threatens to tear Harriet and Gabriel apart. Subscribe right now so you don't miss the moment when Harriet's world explodes. As night fell and the last guest departed, they remained on the terrace overlooking the gardens. Haines had fallen asleep between them, his small head resting in Harriet's lap. The sky was painted in shades of violet and gold, the temperature dropping, but neither moved. To move would be to break the spell. "Do you regret it?" Gabriel asked softly. "Marrying me, accepting this life?" Harriet didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned the question back to him. "Do you regret marrying someone like me? A girl with no family, no status, no education beyond what I taught myself?" Gabriel turned to face her completely, and in the fading light, she could see the tears on his cheeks. "I regret only one thing, that I didn't find you sooner. I wasted so many years believing that love was impossible, that I was incapable of feeling anything real. But I will never regret marrying you. Not in this life, and not in whatever comes after." They sat in silence, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. From the stormy night where she had saved him, through the darkness of his reputation and her doubts, to this moment of perfect peace. "I was nobody," Harriet whispered, "a girl abandoned in the mud, cast out by her own parents. And now I am here, beside a man who chose me, raising a child who calls me mother, preparing to bring new life into a family that loves me. How is this possible? How did my life change so completely? Gabriel took her hand. Because you saved me, not just from death, but from damnation. You believed in the possibility of my redemption when I had given up on myself. And in saving me, you saved yourself. You proved that you were worthy of love, worthy of belonging. He placed his hand gently on her belly and felt the smallest flutter, perhaps imagination, perhaps the beginning of their child. Tears streamed down his face. A child, he whispered. Our child. A life created from love, from choice, from two broken people finding wholeness together. Harriet leaned her head against his shoulder. I was so afraid I would never belong anywhere, so certain this would disappear like a dream. But it's real, isn't it? It is real, he affirmed, and it will only deepen with time. Every day I will choose you. Every day you will choose to believe in my goodness, and every day we will build this life together. When Haynes woke briefly, mumbling about happiness, Gabriel lifted him gently. Together they carried him to bed, tucking him in as a true family, not bound by blood, but by choice and love. Returning to the terrace as the moon rose, Harriet marveled at the transformation. This castle that had been a fortress of pain and loneliness had become a home of hope and renewal. Lights glowed from the windows. In the distance, the forest was peaceful, no longer dark and terrifying, but beautiful and alive. Gabriel pulled her close, and she rested against him, feeling completely safe for perhaps the first time in her life. You are loved completely, he whispered into her hair, unconditionally, forever, by me, by Haynes, by everyone in this manor. You belong here, Harriet. You belong with me. Harriet allowed tears to flow. Pure joy, pure relief, pure gratitude. The girl who was abandoned had finally found her home. And in Walton Manor, now transformed into a place of healing and hope, love had proven to be the greatest power of all. Before you go, I have a question for you. If you were Harriet's parents right now, and you discovered that the daughter you cast out had become a duchess, that she was loved, cherished, and building a family of her own, would you ask for forgiveness, or would you stay silent, ashamed of what you'd done? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single comment, and I genuinely want to hear your perspective. And if you want to see the episode where Harriet's family discovers the truth, where she comes face to face with the parents who abandoned her, subscribe right now so you're here for that moment, because what happens next will shock you. The morning room at Walton Manor was flooded with spring sunlight. Harriet sat in a comfortable chair, nursing her daughter, a perfect, healthy girl with Gabriel's dark eyes and her own determined chin. The baby had been born healthy and strong, exactly 3 months after the wedding. Gabriel entered quietly, as he always did, and stood watching them for a moment before approaching. And the expression on his face was one of wonder, the same wonder that had never faded in the months since his daughter's birth. "How is she?" he asked softly, touching the baby's tiny hand with gentle fingers. "Perfect," Harriet answered, and meant it completely. Growing stronger every day. He kissed the top of his daughter's head, then leaned down to kiss Harriet's forehead. This simple gesture, this tender, habitual affection, was something neither of them took for granted. It was the language of safety, of belonging. Haynes burst into the room with the energy of his 8 years. He was holding a bouquet of flowers and herbs that he and Harriet had gathered that morning. "The valerian is blooming," he announced proudly. "And the chamomile. Can we make the sleeping tea today?" Harriet smiled at the boy she had come to love as fiercely as if she had borne him herself. "Of course, after the baby naps." Gabriel pulled his son close, his hand resting on the boy's shoulder. The sight of them together, the powerful Duke and his son, was a reminder of how completely his capacity for love had been reawakened. From the window, Madame Whitmore observed the family with satisfaction. The heartless Duke's home had become a place of genuine warmth. The servants moved with purpose and genuine contentment rather than fear. The manor itself seemed alive in a way it never had been before. But peace never lasts. Like this video, share and hit the subscribe button now to discover what threatens to destroy everything Harriet and Gabriel have built in Part 2. Don't forget to toggle on your notification button. Thanks for watching.